Nexus. Nexus is Ken Schwaber and Ken Schwaber's next thing. After he did Scrum, he and Jeff Sutherland did Scrum, and now they're doing something to scale. And they're all competing. They are not friends, I can guarantee you that. And but they're all good. They all provide value. There is nothing wrong in using them. On the contrary, it's probably the best thing you can do today if you want to do agile and scaling. So that is not the problem. So what is the problem? Now I'll tell you 6 things, and there are many, many more. But I cannot stand here the whole day and talk about all problems of it. So one of them is all methods are monolithic. They are non-modular. You can't mix and match practices from different methods. You can say, I like safe, but I don't like that in safe. I like that from that. Or I like that from whatever. And okay, so I'll continue that. Methods are like isolated islands. There are no bridges. If you are one, you're stuck there. It's not easy to move from island to island, unless you have some good airplane or whatever. Every method is homegrown, meaning everything about the method is unique. It's user experience, how you present it. Today, people present it, it's better so there. Today, people present it in many different ways. And there are some really great ways, for instance, SAFE. It became very successful because the way it actually described and created a website, very easy to manipulate and go through. Its structure, how you structure a method, how big it is, how small it is, the attitude you have to how you document it, its terminology. They invent their own method terminology that makes them very different and easy to sell. As well as they, of course, we use to some little extent existing terms. And the whole style, whether it's cool or if it is boring, they are all unique. That's why they are homegrown. And comparing and mixing methods is like comparing or mixing cultures. I could say religion, and in Russia it's probably not a problem. But if you were at some other place, for instance Sweden, I couldn't say that. Methods have no common ground. There is nothing they share, or very little. So they all deal with software, so they should share a lot, right? It's basically the same problem we all try to solve. Fact is, they share almost nothing, not even the basics. What is software? What is software development? What's required? Design, test. What is team? Way of working? I could go on forever. There is no complete agreement. They are not far away, but they all be different, make a little bit different, so it's very hard to learn. Practices are locked in method prisons. So practices are the small things you can describe. Usually you learn about use cases, user stories, test-driven development, microservices. They are all small mini methods. A method is more than one of these. A method is everything you need when you develop software. So you need many things. You don't only do requirements, you do design, you do architecture, you do testing, you have configuration management, you do continuous integration, and so lots of things to do. All these things constitute the method. And all these methods I talked about earlier, they have solutions to these problems. There are 100,000 methods or more in the world. Most of them are not documented, but there are lots of them. Every method is a group of some smaller mini methods that I call practices. These are only a few, there are only a few hundreds of practices in the world. This is really very important understanding. There are only a few hundred of them. Even if there are 100,000 plus methods, there are only a few hundred practices, these small things. These practices are not separate. So if they are in a method, they are not easily separate. They are integrated. And you can, like a soup, they are super practices. That means you cannot reuse them. They are stuck in the method. Okay. So we cannot use practices easily to create methods. Anyone disagree? I need to have a little reaction now. Anyone disagree?
I would say in practice you just learn those different methods and you try to combine in your project. This is what I do. So you try, but then you get some very project-specific process picture, which probably you cannot map to any of methodology.
Okay, I agree. You agree. We all agree. Now a very more funny thing here is that method prisons. So practices are kept in prisons of method. But these prisons are controlled by method wardens, gurus. A method warden is like someone having taken care of a prison, right? So the guru controls. Okay, I have myself been a guru, okay? I don't consider myself a guru anymore. I was fired. At that time, it was rational unified process. And it was great to be a guru. I felt it was a little crazy, but nevertheless, it was what I was. The guru controls which practices go into his method or her method. The guru is forced to steal or borrow practices from other methods because there is no reuse. So basically, you cannot go and say, I want to use this practice, but it's not really easily you cannot easily incorporate it in your method because I have my own style. I have my own terminology. The way I describe it is my own way. So I'm forced to say steal. I use the word steal because the guy who created it, he doesn't like it. He doesn't want me to do it. He thinks I am a bad guy. So that is what happens. And I am forced to rewrite the stolen practices to make them fit into my method. It's crazy. The practice is described, it's very good, but it's not described in a way that it can easily be reused. The practice cannot easily be reused by others. So that's why we have these popular methods, and either you work with one or you don't. And another thing that I do, if I borrow or steal a practice from someone else, I improve it. I always improve it. That's what we do. We make it better. We misunderstand it. And then we think it makes it better. I heard very recently someone borrowing, I don't want to be too personal, but firstly, it's a very famous guy. He borrowed another very famous practice, and the latter guy, said he doesn't know what it's all about. So actually, I should say a little bit more. I shouldn't do it, but it's about, no, I don't do it. I get in trouble. I know there is a camera too. So the problem is, no one is really an expert on everything that goes into good method. So there is no one that can say, I was a guru for RUN, but I didn't know all the things that we put into RUN. I knew, let's say, architecture, use cases, design, and modeling languages, but I didn't know much about testing. I mean, I knew as much as most people who do it, but I was not the expert on testing. But still, I had to have it. The same thing, no one can be an expert on everything. But you can be an expert on a practice. So let people be experts on what they are good at, like the practice, and not try to be gurus. And then we have, for 50 years, have a methods war. Can you imagine? We spend so much energy in all these methods war. Not only the people who do it and develop it, but you, because you work in a company, and in one part of the company use one method, you're not talking about a bigger company. Another part of the company use another method, and you cannot really communicate with one another. So, and then there's another problem. Lots of very good practice and never make it because no guru adopts it. A good practice will only be well seen if someone of the famous gurus adopt it. And otherwise, it could be very well adopted. And the worst thing here is that the winner is the best marketeer, not the best technical. The guy who can speak the loudest and is a good sales guy. So now you see I blame myself because I was a good sales guy. But that is not the criteria that should lead to adoption. Criteria should be competence in things like engineering. It's 80% marketing and 20% technology. So method gurus are forced to steal instead of collaborate, and that's why we have these method wars. All right, so here we are, some of the problems. I list them. I don't want to repeat them, but I think this is very immature and foolish that we let this happen. Okay, now I've been provocative. Any opinions here? You're allowed to be provocative too.
Can you say, for example, of the small piece which can be considered as a...
Can you say one example
of this practice?
Of a practice?
That can be considered as an element of method.
Yeah, I mentioned 6, I think. User story, use cases, test-driven development, continuous integration, self-organizing teams.
So these are examples of practices?
Yes. So practices are like mini methods. But to really develop software, you cannot have only one of these. You need to have a whole bunch of them. And the interesting thing that was a discovery that we made 13 years ago, 14 years ago, is that any methodology is a composition of practices. Composition, every practice is like an aspect of development, if you know about that. You can also say practice is to a method what a use case is to software system, if you know use cases. Not everyone knows.
Okay, I guess there is a semantic problem when using terminology.
Absolutely. And the thing is, we have to use intuition.
Yeah. For instance, I guess if you look at strategies, development strategies, maintenance strategies, evaluation strategies, a strategy, you can see a strategy as a process, what to do, and how to do each task, each process, activity, or task of the process. So many different methods can accomplish one process. So one process can be accomplished, the transforming inputs into outputs, by different methods. So in this talk, you are using method as strategy, sometimes as process, and what to do and how to do. That is my critical or spicy question. There is not
absolutely right.
Semantic.
The only problem is that it's not the subject of the discussion. The subject of the discussion is, of my presentation, this is part, ingredients. But the thing is that we have a world today that where people have to go into method prison and cannot easily adopt things from other methods. They have to learn the terminology, they have to work in that world, so we don't really grow our competence. Let me continue so I can show more of how we can change this. So what do we need to do? How are we going to stop this craziness? So on the top I have each problem I just went through, and then on the bottom I have only four things, all big, that we need to do. And the objective is to free the practices, to kill the methods. No, kill the methods to free the practices. All right. So let's start with the common ground. We have no common ground today, or let's say before we started to work on it. And a common ground consists of both a standard kernel, standard a kernel of things we always do, or almost always do. I'll talk about it more, and we need a language to express it. So we need to discover a common ground, something we all can agree on. We are the essential things we do, essential things we work with, essential competences we need to have. And we need a language to describe practices and methods. In 2014, we got one. That was a long time of work with 30, 40 people worked together, and they came from all parts of the world. They agreed on what is the things we always have and do. That was in 2014. The common ground has two things. It has a kernel and a language. Looking for language, it is intuitive, it is visual, it still has a formal definition. So, but the formal definition we don't need to think about. As a normal developer, don't need to think about it. Of course, people who do tools to help working with practices need to know what it is. And we have a kernel which includes the essential things to work with, the essential things to do, and the essential competence you need to have. So you can imagine there was a lot of discussions in this group about things, if an element should be part of a kernel, a common ground, or not. For instance, many people think architecture is something you always should have. Unfortunately, not everyone does an architecture. So obviously, and that makes sense. Obviously, we don't want architecture to be in the common ground, but we want to be able to add architecture later. So that became essence, and essence is the common ground that we rely on. Without the common ground, without the standard, there is no way we can build an ecosystem where people can go and find important practices, specific things to do. So that was the first step. I never expected it to take 10 years to get it. But I should tell you something. In around 2000, Rational Unified Process RUP was my baby. And it was my baby, but it was marketed by Rational Software. And Rational Software was an extremely successful company. I had started to get serious problem because I knew that there is no way this can survive all the future, because future has a lot in the baggage. And that is true for every method. Everything you hear about, safe, dead, and so on, they have a limited lifespan because there is always something that will come later. So at that time, instead of coming up with something like safe, we had a safe in my company. We had a similar thing, and we sold it and marketed it. But I couldn't be interested. I felt this is just doing the same thing over and over again, fighting about best practices. So that's how I came to the conclusion I needed to go underneath. Instead of trying to get the best method, find a common ground so we can start to talk about methods and compare methods like by like, which we cannot do today. It's very hard to compare two methods today and to understand what are the real differences, because they are everything is different. So this was clearly what we had to do. And so we're starting with the language. I don't know if you can see it because it's quite small text. But I'll try to explain to you. We had one, the language is very simple, very simple. I'll tell you about the notation. There is semantics behind some semantics. Something is on purpose undefined in the language, but something you have to add as a definition later. Basically, there are holes in the language that are well known to be defined. So we have this hexagon. We have, there is an example of a practice. Daily stand-ups, it's a very simple practice. We the language is described in terms of, the practice is described in terms of activities, which is the same as it always has been. Oh, I need more time, sorry for that. I think you can. And we have a very important element that we never had before, that has been called alphas. We tried all kinds of terms, and then we were stuck, and we used the Greek alphabet to talk about the most important element, and that's the first letter of the alphabet. So these are the things we always work with. I'll show you examples of what these things are. So that is, this look like a fish, but it's an alpha symbol. And we had examples of that. We also have work products, which are like documents and so on. And we have competency, which star represent competency. We have basically 5 different competences in the kernel. And we have finally pattern, a pattern that we use, that is something used over and over again. And I will not delve into this. For those of you who fell off right now, the only thing you need to think about is that we have a number of symbols in the language, and they are clearly defined in a formal way. And that's all. You can learn the language in less than 2 hours. So it's a very easy understanding. It's not like UML, for instance. It's significantly simpler. But we need to have some way to express what we're talking about. So, and then the kernel is also quite simple. There are the most important elements in the kernel are the alphas. And what are they? Okay, first we have 3 different areas we have to think about when you think about software and software development. When you have a project, endeavor, or something like that. We have a customer space, a customer area. We, of course, need to think about the customer, whatever we call it, when we develop software. And there's always an opportunity to address some way to make money or some way to solve a problem that's important. There's always an opportunity. And we always have stakeholders. Most often we forget to involve the stakeholders when we develop software, so we don't get the software that will be popular. We always have a solution. And solution means we need to understand what are the requirements. Don't think requirement specification, because this has nothing to do with that. You should think about requirements. At least you should have something in your head when you develop software. You always have a software system. That is what thing you build. And the third area of concern is the endeavor. This is where the management of a project lies. So you always have work to do. You always have a team. At least a team could be a team of team. And you have always a way of working. Way of working is like a method. You have it always, even if you never describe it. So these are things you always have. You cannot touch them. You cannot touch requirements. You can touch evidence of requirement, for instance, specification, but you cannot touch requirements. And that is really difficult, and I wish I had more time to spend, because this takes time to really get underneath. But you don't really need to understand what we're talking about. This is something you always have. You always work with when you develop software. And you should focus on the essential things. So now, take one of the alphas, opportunity. What's interesting about an alpha is that it has states. So you can see the progression of that alpha. It has states from, first it's identified, then there is, you identify there is an opportunity, then you know there is a solution, then the value of it is established, and so on. So when you work on software development, you should move along these states so you know what you're doing and don't take risks. Software system goes through a number of states as well. You have an architecture, you can demonstrate it, it's usable, it's ready, operational, and finally retired. So they go through states. Okay, And every sub-state has its own car. So how do you know when you've reached the state? Yeah, you know it because there is a checklist for each state. So for each state there is a number of checklist items that you have to go through. And if all these are done, you can move. So the next is homegrown methods. They are gone. We have a standard language. And now it means you have at least a standard way of describing practices. Very simple, very intuitive. Today doesn't exist. There's no such way. Usually people spend too much on writing. These become very concise. The practice is described on a number of costs, actually. So you saw some of the costs. Usually a practice like Scrum takes about 16 costs, and then the whole practice is described. Not as deep as the Scrum Guide, but the essence of a practice is described. So if you had some education in Scrum, this is the only thing you really need to go take with you afterwards, because it helps you remember what is the essential things. Modelize each method. This is a practice architecture in which practices are first-class citizens. So at the bottom we have the essence kernel and essence language, and on top of it we describe the practices. This is what you and Ray asked for before. How do you get practices? You have them on top of the kernel. And at the very top you have the methods, essentialized. So this is not the same. For instance, if you take SAFe, SAFe is today a lot of implementation. This is an essentialized version of SAFe, capturing the essence of the whole of it. So that is one thing you do, and that way you get your practice separately. So this is an essentialized method, just to give you an example. It has at the bottom the essence kernel, and then there are practices built on top of the essence kernel. And that becomes a method. So in this way, using essence, any method becomes modular, and it follows the standard. So now, what do I mean by kill all methods? Free the practices. I don't really want them to kill all this good stuff out there. What I want is to replace all these methods that are not yet essentialized. Give a huge problems I just talked about. They give all these problems. Method prisons, method gurus, method wars, and so on. So they need to be killed. Dramatic way of expressing it. By freeing the practices locked into it. Take out the practices and make them free so they can stand on themselves. Essentialize the practices. And by letting the method resurrect, survive again, come up again, by composing its practices. Of course, we want all good methods to back, but deliberate it from the existing problem, the method prison, the method guru. After this, we won't have any. There's really no reason to have method gurus. Instead, we will have practice gurus. But that is about competence, and you can compare practices with practices. You cannot compare a method with method. So, okay. This slide should actually, I got some help to fix the slides, and this slide had come in the wrong place. It should have been before. But what we really want to do is to create an ecosystem where practices live separate from the methods using them. But no, this is actually the fourth point. Okay, so this is the fourth point. We want the practice to live separate from the methods using them. So every practice can develop and be better and better. People improve it wherever they are. They improve the practices, and then they separate. So they are separated from methods. And then you can use practices. You put together your own method by using these practices. You can add stuff too. So that is about the ecosystem. Take a look at this example. Imagine you have a practice ecosystem, a library, for instance, for practice. You have your own practices, you have safe, you essentialized, you have DAG, Nexus. Just to give you an example. So this is what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to select practices from anyone and put together to create your own method. And but you ignore the ones you don't need anymore. You create your own method. Mixing and matching practices from any method you want. That's where we want to go. So, I'm now through the basics. What is it that the awkward situation we have and what we need to do? Now, what do we get? Every team can select their own preferred method. Very light. And they can do it to have, it becomes very easy to teach, learn, and so on. Practice can come from everywhere, and you get a continuous improvement. It's a smooth path in how you develop over time your practices and your methods. You can measure progress and health of projects. This is an example from Carnegie Mellon, where there were 7 different teams. To the left up there you have 7 different projects, and they all had different methods. They all had different projects, but you could see how far they have come because you have these state progressions. You could see that some of them are really not successful because of this state progression. So you can do that independent on what method they use. So they can use any method, but you can still govern them and see the progression. Imagine a project manager with many teams. Imagine a product manager with many products. Imagine a program manager with many products. What a hard situation to know where things are going on if they don't have one framework to do. No, it doesn't move here. Okay. It did move, but I didn't see it. So, well, since I'm lacking time, can I get a little bit more time, or is it? Do we have?
It's okay. It's okay. You started.
The boss saying it's okay, so then I take that for given. So here, for instance, this project here is when it comes to the quality is not so good here. So, these are 7 projects here. And here are the alphas. So here at the top is opportunity, stakeholder requirements, and so on. They are the alphas. So project or group 2, which is distributed, they are sitting everywhere, they have come to the conclusion that opportunity is viable. But at the same time, they have not moved the software system. They have not done anything. So they have maybe, without having done anything, they still think the product is viable. That's a clear example of something that probably will go wrong. And if we have another project over here, they have come to the conclusion that stakeholder has not yet, we have not yet recognized the stakeholders. They don't know who they are. Can you imagine? And so this is real. This is something that really was done. But they think the software system is usable. That's a probably common situation. People who develop software, they think it's very good software, but our stakeholders, we don't care about them. And this is a very common situation. And that is a good reason for failure. All developers speak the same language, independent on which method they use. This is another value. So they have a barrier between we have a barrier between the two organizations, people in two different people in the same company, but in two different organizations working with different methods. They cannot talk to one another. I mean, I really see this in many, many situations. You are in two different organizations, they are developing two different products or product line. They have no common ground. So they cannot talk to one another. You cannot easily move from one organization to the other without sitting on the benches for a couple of months. I did it myself. I moved from one organization to another, and even if I was a top expert in the first organization, I had to learn what language they used in this new, nothing in common. And it's very normal that you try to invent a new language because you really like to put the footprint. So one other value is that your organization is forever learning. Here we have two different curves. The lower curve is as it is today, and this is time. They usually follow a zigzag path because you learn one method and you become better and better on that, and then suddenly, no, we're not going to do structured programming anymore. We are going to object orientation. Okay, so then you start all over, and you start from a lower point where you are. Have to learn new. You have to learn the things you already knew, but in a new way. So you follow a zigzag path. This is something that people who have been working in the industry several years, they feel they never can build their knowledge. So we are not growing our competence, and that is general for the whole industry. Whereas if you have a common ground, you have competence practices that are in a library, in an ecosystem where people all around the world go and change them, you will learn in a more smooth way. You will change your method, not by moving from one method to another, but by adding a practice or take away an old practice. Small steps. So you have a common language, a common culture. Every individual competence will increase, and more competent people will develop better software, faster people, and happier customers, and they will be able to innovate more. Because if you can spend your energy on other things than reinventing the wheel, you can innovate more. So this is huge. And finally, the value point I have here is the organization adopts industrial scale engineering. But by that I mean, today software development is more of a craft. I have to say that software development will always need craftsmanship. We always need competence. That craftsmanship can stand on more or less engineering, more or less science, more or less structural knowledge, but we'll have it. But today we are at a less mature level than where we stand later. So this picture shows what we did in medicine 7,500 years ago. And people were craftsmen, they were doctors, medicine, but their tool and their ability to help people with problems with legs was to take it off. My grandpa got both his legs taken off because they didn't know how to deal with it. And today, there are many different techniques to fix your leg. This is what's it called? B-pole. You put in two instruments and the water goes through it and takes away garbage in the knee. So anyway, tomorrow's software development is less of a craft and more of an engineering discipline. We still always need craftsmanship, but we will have more tools, more techniques, because we work more systematically. We have a way to systematically improve our ideas on how to work. So this is also huge. So very quickly now I have what is happening. There are basically we talk about the industry and the academics. In the industry there are service companies, the big service companies in the world are moving to essentialization because they have so many methods, and they want to be able to move our people from one to the other. Tata Consulting, Red Hat, and many others. We have a large telecom vendor in East Asia that's adopted Essence, and many more are on the way. There are tools available to work with practices. Finally, companies get out of their method prisons and can build forever learning organizations. In the academic world, we have many around the world, I mentioned about 10 universities or more, where people are teaching Essence. Professor Pekka Abrahamsson, who was a professor in Norway, he basically said for him there is no future without Essence, because he thinks we're done with, we have moved beyond Scrum and Kanban, and for him the future is based on Essence. And there is a big project now with 25 university professors from around the world that are working on training in Essence. So finally, universities get something systematic. I mean, university professors today, what do? They teach one method and let people work with that. Or they teach 25 methods, like the most popular book in software engineering is Ian Somerville's, who has presented I don't know how many methods, and they're all in one book, described in their own language. I mean, after that, people have an idea that is very complex, but they don't really carry anything with them for life. Anything fundamental, that's basic, that will be there even 10, 15 years from now. So, this is something to ask yourself. Can we truly enable and empower our teams and become true learning organization whilst we behave like the fashion industry?
No.
No. Can we really see ourselves as an open, diverse, and collaborative community whilst we continue to attack one another and rebrand, reinvent, and rename everything?
No.
No. Are you asleep? Are you shy? Are we doomed to be locked in a never-ending method war?
No way.
No way. So, of course, we can do better than that. I said earlier that you could call it, the talk could be about being smart with methods. So, do you now know how to become smart with methods? How many think we know it? One, two. I don't think I will ever be invited here again. After this really poor performance, I've been speaking for 1 hour, and I saw two friends, and not even professors could agree that I have explained how to be smart with methods.
You should start
Let me try one more time. So this is two fools who are standing on the street and talking to one another, wondered how we could become rich. And then at that moment, the guy in a Lamborghini, really nice car, he parks the car at the curbside, and the one fool says to the other, I think he knows how to become rich. I'll go and ask him. So he walks up to him and says, Sir, can you tell me how you become rich? Oh, you have to be smart. Smart? What does that mean? Okay, I'll show you. So the guy, the rich guy, he put his hand against the trunk of a tree, and he says to the fool, hit me as hard as you can. You want to learn how to become rich? Okay. So he hit as hard as he could. But of course, at that very moment, the rich guy, he moved his hand and said, so now you know what it means to be smart, and he walked away. The poor guy, he had hit his hand in the tree and didn't feel very well, but he go back to his friend, and the friend asked him, do you know how to become rich? Yes, you have to be smart. Smart, what is that? Okay, I'll show you. And he looked around, but he couldn't find any trees, so he said, hit me as hard as you can. So now, how many know what it means to be smart with methods? A little bit better. Okay, I'm not happy. Can I ask you one more time? So, all right, can we have any questions?
Yeah.
So we need probably a microphone, so.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming here and for this impressive, you are changing actually, yeah, the world. And so I have a couple of questions. So first one is, actually you said that people around the world in the business and in like academic world, so they learn essence already. But as I understand, if I understand correctly, to develop and improve practices, we need like method makers to also like, they should use essence, right? Yeah, and is already there any work done on that? So like, does anybody who like improves Kanban or agile or, yeah, so do they actually use
That's a question, but I agree this is a very important question. Today, there are about, I would say, 100 practices being centralized. And we have published 25 or 30 published practices being centralized in my company. And they are on the web, so you can freely access them. Scott Amber, the father of Dad, is about decentralizing parts of his practices. Then there are, I mean, the difficulty they have is that as soon as they move out or from and do this, their value is diminished quite a lot, because now they don't have more than the composition left. We have a centralized SAFE, and we did it in less than 1 month, and SAFE is huge. We have not published it, because if we publish it, we cannot do consulting on SAFE. So we make good money on consulting, so we are very good friends. But it is really a dramatic improvement if you have it decentralized. Sooner or later, we also have talking to, so there are things I cannot make public, but I can tell you so much. We are very confident that they all will come as soon as it starts to move. We are, big companies like Tata Consulting Services have decentralized all their, have said, I don't know about it, decentralized all their methods. Red Hat is extremely excited about using it, and that's a good company. And we are working, right now I'm working with one company, and I'm actually allowed to tell you that. It's Tieto in Nordic countries. We are developing practices for the cloud. So it is happening. It's a slow process because people are used to have a method, and they're not used to the value in conciseness, in formality, in engineering. It takes a little while to get your head around it. It's a slow process, but I am convinced it will happen.
I understand what's happened in industry, okay?
Yeah.
But why wouldn't academia do it? I mean, it's like a student who do it as his diploma thesis.
Yes.
Pick up like a general Scrum and try to put it into essence definitions. Does that happen? Are
Yes.
there any like academic publications trying to?
You are exactly right. So we have a project now called CMAT Education Project. In that project, it started 2 years ago, that project, by writing a book, which is in its first draft, ready for, and people can download it. That book is for first-year students, newbies. It's very, very tough to dare go and teach first-year students in software engineering. But thanks to it's so systematic, it's so simple to understand it if you have with just a high school background. And with that, we have now, the book is now have been reviewed by 25 professors around the world. I don't know anyone who has really done it from Russia. Maybe Boris has done a little of it at least, but it's from all around the world. And we have got 1,000 comments to the book. Now we are working on taking care of these comments one by one. After that, we feel we have a book that at least stands the test of real review. And then it will be published. Now, this is just the beginning, because I don't see the book as an end result. Instead, it's just a component in a project for education. That project consists of 4 tracks. They all form, they all have a chairman to run them. One is a continuation of his book, writing another book, because there are many books to be written, and also to develop training material, so it can be a box that every university professor can take with him to university and teach. There is another track about exercises, and there are lots of exercises being planned for the book, so there's both small and big exercises. Then there is a track called essentialization, and that's where you were. And that track is about essentializing a lot of existing practices, and also books, existing books. Now, the most tricky thing here is that I really don't want to essentialize something without consent of the owner of that practice. So I don't like to essentialize Scrum without having consent of the Scrum guys. Finally, there is one track, the games track, and there are hundreds of games using Essence today.
One more question.
One more question.
One more time I ask you. Please give us some example of a new method you constructed from some practices which were defined by your approach. So you started today's lecture from the fact that there are different methods, but they have very common small pieces. You called it practices. So after that, you have already told us that you described, you and your colleagues have already described about 100 practices. Can you give us some practical example of a new method which was constructed from these practices?
What you can construct from these practices?
But I mean, not scientific, not academic example. Some real example of a new method.
Just repeat the last word.
I need a good example of industrial new method which was constructed from practices which you have already defined.
Natural unified process was the first one. The total redesign.
RUP
Yes.
is described from practices.
Yes, not RUP, but we call it essential unified process. But it is RUP that is redesigned using these practices. And you can find it on our website, you can just go and see it. It's called essential unified process. It's about 100 courses, 100 poker-sized courses, describes the whole practice, the whole RUP.
Okay.
And that's one. Another is DSDM, which is a very popular methodology in UK. It's now dying because it's not agile. But so even not agile methods can be described using an agile approach to describe methods.
Okay.
And we have done it for SAFE, as I said, but you cannot publish it. We have done it for 50 methods where we have gone through to make sure the hypothesis is that every method is a composition of practices, and every practice can be described using a common ground with a language and a kernel. And so that is, we have done it for, I said 50, but published 4 or 5, so you can go and see 4 or 5 on our website. We have done more, but it's not published. And many others are doing it. We are not the only one. It's a lot of work going on in Korea, and so on. So it is happening.
Thank you, Ivar. Thank you very much for making all the way down to St. Petersburg. My apologies for the Russian customs. So I really hope that next time we will have a few papers at this conference presenting, how do you call it? Essence and essentialization. Next year we'll go.
Okay. And if you are interested in research, this is an open area. Very easy to get to research results. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.